Hopefully they show up. If they don't, it's all good.
Yeah. Um, we did have some registrations, so like they should have gotten a reminder about an hour ago to show up on
Cool.
that. We'll just kind of chit chat here for a second while
Or
we get attendees in. Um,
do you have any big events that you're excited about at the bookstore?
I'm super stoked. Austin Channing Brown is coming in April, and she's talking about her young readers edition. And she's going to be in the Grand Rapids store in April, and I'm very stoked about that. And we just always have a lot of fun authors to talk to. Our lineup right now is a decent number of debut authors and local authors, which we love to promote them. But they all kind of fly out of my head when I get asked. But
No, that's totally normal. Do debut authors approach you a lot, or do local authors approach you a lot, or do they just kind of walk into the store and they're like, I'm an author, like, let's do something together?
yeah, we do have a decent number that approach us. We have a local author application on our website that a lot of them come through. And then because publishers know that we love them, publishers sometimes send us emails. So I was like, hey, we have this author. Do you want them to come in? Yeah, so they kind of come from all over. Some of them, the authors reach out to us directly. Some of them, we reach out to them because we know that we're excited about their book or things like that. For those joining us, we're so excited to be talking to George tonight, who is a debut author, and we're just chit-chatting about how we get events at the bookstore. We'll start officially in a couple minutes, but yeah.
Yeah. No. So I really want to visit the bookstore at some point.
Yeah.
Do you try and keep, because I know that Schuler obviously have more than one store. Do you try and lay it out like a regular indie, or do you try and like do like unique things and change it up and stuff?
So I don't know if you're familiar or if you were familiar with Borders. But when Borders existed, that is where our owners met. They both worked at Borders, and so a lot of people say our stores feel like a Borders. Now
That's how
Borders no longer exists,
I
so
grew
we're
up down
happy.
the street from one.
Yeah.
Every Friday I would go to Borders and just like pick out like the latest comic books and just sit down and read.
Yeah. So that's what we get like comped to the most often. We are a large format store, so we are like a bigger floor plan than a lot of indie bookstores, but we try to keep little pockets of cozy and lots of interesting displays and things around our stores.
That is awesome. That
Yeah.
is really cool. I really like that because it's kind of like the only player there seems to be Barnes and Noble, maybe Books a Million.
Yeah.
But I just like the fact that there are like smaller chains that are kind of taking up residencies there.
Yeah, for sure. We're definitely trying to fill that niche. Like, we have all the kinds of books. So hopefully you walk in and you find what you're looking for in our stores in that large format setting, but we still have the heart and soul of an indie.
I
It's
love
kind of
that.
that nice combination.
Yeah. Do you find that you ever get to read for fun, or is it mostly like, okay, I have to read to keep up with all of the events that I'm doing?
I do read for fun. My job has definitely affected what I read. It has given me access to a different set of books, or just put different books on my radar than before. But I admittedly don't read every book that I do an event for. We run about 200 events a year, and so I just don't have the capacity to read every single book, but I do try to at least read parts of the books. But I will say I did read all of Shad Hadid and the Alchemists of Alexandria. And I do try to read the ones that like I'm personally interested in. But as you know, not every book is for every reader. And so I like to champion all kinds of books, but I do follow my like reading tastes in my fun reading time.
Oh,
Um, And I don't read at work very much unless it is for an event. Like, I think that's a misconception of working in the book world, is that you have time to read at work. That's not really true, but so I
Not
do
at
most
all.
of my reading on my free time.
That's awesome. I mean, it's kind of like an extension of the job that happens to be fun, you know.
Yeah,
And some people who work overtime and don't enjoy it, and then there's bookstore people who get to read for fun.
yeah, for sure. Um, okay, I'm throwing this at you on the fly. We have a couple participants here, which thank you so much for coming, everyone. Feel free to drop in the chat where you're joining from. And I'm going to throw this at you on the fly. How do you feel if I throw this on Facebook Live as we talk as well? We'll be
I
here.
feel totally cool.
Great. I'm going to do that real quick. And then we will officially get started and hype up this amazing book.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I didn't even know you could throw this like Zoom conversation onto Facebook Live.
Yeah, for sure. We don't always do it, but it's sometimes a fun way to like try to find a different audience.
Yeah,
If
let's
it's
do it.
on Facebook Live.
Facebook crowd.
Preparing to live stream. It'll just take a second here.
Wow. So is it like Zoom has a Facebook integration?
Yeah, they do. Yeah. Okay. And now we're on Facebook as well.
Now we're on Facebook.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there'll be a little bit of a delay there, but that's okay.
All good.
All right, we're so excited for this. So I'm going to do my official little intro here. We're super casual here at Schuler Books, but so excited to talk to authors. Good evening, friends and readers. My name is Elizabeth Bosher, and I'm from Schuler Books. I'm the event coordinator. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight virtually for an evening with George Jreije in celebration of his book, Shad Hadid and the Alchemists of Alexandria. Schuler Books is an independent bookstore with 3 locations in Michigan, and we are proudly celebrating 40 years of bookselling this year. You can follow along with all the bookstore happenings on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. George is a Lebanese-American author of novels and short stories. When not writing, George enjoys trying tasty Arab desserts or messing with new yoga poses. You can find him in the Northeast or in his native Lebanon, scouring the small country for some delicious baklava. If you still need a copy of the book and wish to support this independent bookstore, please reference the links in the chat to direct you to the website schulerbooks.com. If you are a Michigan local, we encourage you to check out our brick and mortar locations in Grand Rapids, Alchemists, and Ann Arbor, and soon to be West Bloomfield. So keep an eye out for that. We are about to begin here. Keep in mind that throughout the event, if you have questions, feel free to chat them in, ask in the Q&A bubble. If you're on Zoom, if you're on Facebook, feel free to drop them in the chat below this video, and I will try to feed as many to George as I can. And this goes without saying, but please remember to be respectful and mindful with your questions.
Yeah.
Welcome, George.
Send those questions our way. We're happy to answer them.
Yeah. Okay, I always want to start by asking, can you pitch us your book? Can you tell us what this is about?
Sure. So Shad Hadid and the Alchemists of Alexandria is about a 12-year-old alchemist by the name of Shad, who happens to be Lebanese American, like myself, who loves sweets and loves baking. He wants to be a baker, but he discovers he comes from a long line of alchemists and instead receives an invitation to the Alexandria Academy. What's really cool about that is it's all about alchemy. However, it allows us to see how Shad uses his love of baking to enhance his ability to do this alchemy. And it's just a whole lot of fun. It's kind of like a diverse response to Harry Potter, but kind of flips the trope on its head. And so fans of, magical schools and whatnot would really enjoy this book.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm sorry, I got in a different screen. That's awesome. So you and I have had a couple conversations, and I love the setup of this book. I love that we're working with a more diverse cast of characters, but I also know that there are some personal elements to you that you're pulling on some inspiration from your own experience. Can you talk about those elements and what maybe pieces and parts you've pulled from your own life?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I did a school visit earlier today, as you know, and one of the biggest kind of parts of my interactive presentation is helping the kids to determine their own story. Because I think with every good idea, the best way to bring out a rich story that people will really enjoy is to tie it to personal elements. And so when I was coming up with the idea for this, I was like, okay, what about my life could make an intriguing story? And there were several things that actually made it to the final cut. The first is Shad Hadid, who is really a reflection of the person that I was at 12 years old, just a massive troublemaker with a heart of gold, always wanted to help folks, and also someone with a massive sweet tooth. So, Shad has these catchphrases like fig, or holy cannoli and whatnot. And just like the pastry references are everywhere. And so that's basically a reflection of me as a 12-year-old loving food and growing up with my grandmother and my mother as they made delicious Lebanese desserts and pastries and all kinds of great food. So that stuff makes it into the book a whole lot. I also tie in a lot of themes that I feel like will resonate with different readers, depending on where they're coming from, whether age or culture. And so one of the biggest things is kind of this dichotomy between the necromancers and the alchemists, right? The alchemists want balance, the necromancers kind of want modernity and advancement at any cost. And so I always kind of viewed that as part of like my inner struggle to try and determine, what is the direction I want to take with my life? Do I want to seek more balance, or do I really want to just charge ahead? And so I think those are the elements that really define the book and take bits of me and what I kind of struggle with and love and make it onto the page.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so there's the aspects of the book that you've pulled on from your own life, but were there parts of the book that you had to like do a lot of research about or really dig into something that you maybe didn't know about before you started writing?
Yeah, definitely. I didn't do a whole bunch of research for this book because I'm more just like, let's come up with it on the fly, imagination 100%. However, I did want to do it justice in terms of, timing. So Shad is part of a certain class at the Alexandria Academy, and time-wise, it relates to the historical time that the supposed Library of Alexandria was burned down. And so it's kind of like the theory behind it is like the Library of Alexandria had burned down supposedly to everyone else, but in secret, it was a school for alchemy and has continued and remained. And so there was a lot of historical research there just to make sure I got that right because I want to do it justice, but also just making sure that as I included individuals from other cultures, I want to be as wide as possible across the Arab world. And so I made sure to research that as well. There was a little bit of research done with alchemy and to make that like a little more realistic as a magic system. But on the whole, that was a lot like kind of coming up with stuff on the fly and just being silly.
Yeah, for sure. So having a character who's an Arab character, unfortunately is still pretty unique in literature and especially middle grade. I would love it if you talked a little bit about like why is diversity so important in books, and why is it especially important in this middle grade category? And for those who may not know, middle grade is 8 to 12
8,
ish.
12, 9 to 14, it depends on how around
Yeah.
that
And it's
category.
just a category of, it's really marketing more than anything. But that's what we mean when we say middle grade.
Yeah, I totally encourage readers of all ages to read middle grade, but it's just so important, especially in middle grade, because it is catered towards a younger audience that this is like their into books. Like if they don't like books now, it might turn them off later. And so they really have to find something that speaks to them. And a lot of times, if you get a kid like me who grew up with kind of this Arab culture, and I'm reading books and I'm kind of like, I don't see myself in any of this. I'm just going to throw the books down and go play video games or do something else because there are so many things competing with your attention these days. So it's so important to have diverse literature because if I were to see Shad Hadid at 12 years old and read it and recognize all these wonderful tropes and elements of my culture, I would be more motivated to become a reader and try other things that may not be part of my culture, but because I've experienced that joy of reading, I will want to dive more into it. And so many kids from so many cultures have felt for so long that they are not represented, and that just literature in the West is not for them. And so we're hoping to change that as diverse authors and really build a place for them, build a space for them.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know you've become friends with a decent amount of other authors. Are there other authors who are writing in this diversity space that you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just in the Arab space, my friend Chelsea wrote The Stardust Thief, which is adult fiction. And that is such a fantastic novel. I would highly encourage anyone to read it. And then in YA fiction, there is another Lebanese author, Maya Ibrahim, who just came out with Spice Road, which is another fantastic book. So literature with Arab authors is starting to become more of a thing now, which I'm very happy to see. And then, of course, depending on what kind of culture you come from, my friend Jamar Perry writes African-inspired fantasy, and that's middle grade. There's so many other fantastic books that just reflect the genre, and I can just go on and on. You know, Erin Entrada Kelly writes fantastic middle grade. But yeah, it's Katie Zhao, Chinese inspired middle grade. So we're starting to see more of it, and I every day I kind of go onto social media and I see someone else announcing a deal, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you told me you love to talk about the process of publishing. I'm going to kind of let you lead that part, but like, what do you want to tell us about what it's like to be in the publishing world? And this is your first published book. And so you are a debut author. And so that also comes with its own perspective. But
Yeah.
tell us about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a nutshell, publishing is a very hard space to exist in just because of how much demand there is for individuals wanting to break in. So whether you want to be on like the side of the professionals, so you want to become an editor, you want to become someone who works in publishing, it's very hard because a lot of people want to work in that space. But if you're in my side and you want to become an author, it's just as hard. I mean, I can speak to that for days, but essentially the process of becoming published is very straightforward. If you're trying to pursue traditional publication like myself, you need to get a literary agent, and then the literary agent needs to pitch you to publishers. And just getting a literary agent is really hard, right? That's one gatekeeper. And then, of course, the editor at the publishing house who needs to accept the manuscript is another gatekeeper. And I think that when individuals kind of fail is that they'll try and pitch like the first thing that they write. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. And you'll hear this over and over by authors who've kind of gotten there, because you see like the tip of the iceberg, you see that one published novel, right? So now I have two deals, one for the Shad Hadid series and then another one for graphic novels that's forthcoming. But you don't see like the 5 or 6 novels I wrote beforehand that like totally flopped or just I knew were not good enough.
Yeah.
And just kind of practice runs. So I think that publishing, like in a nutshell, it's hard, but it's like it's not a matter of if you're persistent enough, it's a matter of when.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of like my spiel on it. And I can there's so many different threads there.
Yeah, for sure. How about for maybe our younger listeners, if they think that writing might be something they want to pursue, what would you tell them?
If you're starting out young, you're in a really good place because I mean, I started around I was 20. And so if you're starting out young, and young is relative, right? Whether you're 20 or 30, like it's never too early, never too late. It doesn't matter. So if you're starting out now, the best thing to do is just be as patient as possible and focus on becoming the best writer you can be, because eventually the writing is undeniable and it's so good that folks cannot resist it and they cannot say no, and they have less reasons to reject you.
Yeah.
So just continue writing and write the best stories you can, and you're going to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. All right. So in Shad Hadid, we have some magic, we have necromancers, which are our kind of evil force.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot of food. So I know I got really hungry when I was reading this book. But do you have some favorite foods or treats that you enjoy, George?
Yes, the hardest question of them. I So if you read the book, you'll find that I especially love baklava. And what baklava is, for those who don't know, and it's across the Mediterranean, whether you're Greek, Lebanese, Syrian, Turkish, they all have kind of a different variation of the dessert. And it's essentially just like this kind of like phyllo bread on the top and bottom and stuffed with nuts in the middle and kind of drizzled with honey or some other sugary sauce, and it's just delicious. And so that pastry is my favorite. I can name off a whole bunch of Arabic pastries, but I would say baklava is like up there in the Mount Rushmore. And on the food side, it's really tough, but I mean, you can't really go wrong with a really delicious falafel sandwich. I mean, that's just a staple.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love falafel. I had falafel the other night.
Well, you're kind of blessed actually, because I know that in Michigan in general, there's a massive Arab population.
Mhm.
And like the Arab American Museum, which sponsors the Arab American Book Awards, they're located in Detroit. So
Yeah, yeah. Um, yes, we are very blessed with diversity across the state. In Grand Rapids, which is where I am, so that's the other side of the state from Detroit. So we're a little bit further removed, but we still have some really great Mediterranean restaurants here, and we just have a plethora of restaurants, which is so fun. But yes, I found my husband and I found a place that does really good falafel, and we were very excited.
that's all you need right there.
Yeah, and actually next to our new West Bloomfield store, so that's really close to Detroit, there are a couple Mediterranean bakeries, and I haven't gotten to try them yet, but I'm so excited, and we're hoping that one of them would help cater our grand opening. So secret, but
All right, doesn't leave this room. But
yeah,
uh,
and the internet, but
I was gonna say you gotta collab or something, because it's just
yeah.
an opportunity to pass up.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll make sure to request the baklava in that catering order.
I'll be there.
Okay, what else can we ask about your story? So Shad is not the only character, obviously. There's a lovely group of friends. Um and do you think it's sorry, I lost my question. Do you like writing the friend group, or are there specific characters that like you like writing about more? Or is it fun to like have them as the group together?
That's a fantastic question. So I feel like with side characters, a lot of them have to really happen organically to be done right. And so I really enjoyed writing kind of Shad's counterpart. And it's like a really interesting dynamic that evolves throughout the story. But Sarah, who is Shad's bully at the outset, and Sarah is so complicated and nuanced because it like essentially she's meant to show that everyone behaves a certain way for a reason. And getting to understand one another is the key to bridging differences. And so Sarah was a super fun character to write. And I know I'd mentioned this character to you earlier, but Donnie is my favorite side character to write because I'm a pantser, and that means I kind of don't plot any of my novels beforehand. I kind of just write on the fly and see what happens, and of course go back and revise it. So Donnie was something that just came about organically. I had not planned for him. And he's this character who's always kind of sleepy and whatnot. So he's dubbed pretty early on Drowsy Donnie. But like there are kind of twists and turns and character development and all this really juicy stuff that happens with him that is just so enjoyable as an author to write and discover. But I think, and what I've heard from readers, to read as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I like writing the friend group. I like kind of varying them all and giving them their own different like quirk, and trying to draw a little bit of myself or people I actually know and throw them in there.
Yeah.
That's always a pleasure.
Do you tell people when you're like, I based a character off of you?
I see, I would do that more, but there's a cat who's prominently featured in the book, and she's named after my mother. And I don't know if my mother really liked that as much because I don't think she's a pet person the way I am. And so
Yeah.
now I'm just like, I'll just keep it to myself. And,
Yeah.
I won't overtly name characters after real people so that they can tell.
But you definitely pull on that experience, sounds like.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I have.
Okay, you said you're a pantser, which is a term that we use in the book world sometimes. There's plotters who like write out outlines of things, and then there's pantsers who just kind of discover the plot as they go. Kind of elaborating on that, what does your writing process look like? Do you like sit down at the same time every day and write? Do you just kind of let inspiration happen?
Yeah,
Tell me
that's
more
great.
about that.
I think it's a little bit of both. So I firmly believe that if you sit down and just wait for the inspiration to come, it just never will, because there's some element of discipline and just actually forcing yourself to start typing something up of even a sentence just to get the juices going. And so I'll often just like pick quiet pockets of time throughout the day just because I can't sit down and just do 2 hours dedicated writing, unless I'm in like some rare circumstance or a writing retreat or something. But generally speaking, I'll just like finish, the workday and be like, all right, well, between now and dinner, I'm just going to sit down in this 15-20 minutes and just write up a couple paragraphs, and a couple paragraphs turns into a couple pages. And so oftentimes, as soon as I get the juices flowing, like I'm in the zone. So that's kind of, I try and force it to a degree. Now, when it comes to plotting or pantsing, I generally like start with a concept or a character and I just kind of let it run from there. And I just throw them into weird situations and see how they get out of it. But I'll always, and this is kind of common advice now, but I'll always kind of end my writing on a cliffhanger just so that I'm excited to come back to it the next day and continue writing.
Mm-hmm.
And the other bit is sometimes I'll leave myself notes for like plot points way further on because I'm just like, okay, I'm starting to know this character. It would be really cool if this happened to them or if they did this or if they like mention this. And that kind of becomes like an informal plan of action for the story. So that's
Yeah.
kind of my process. It's a little bit random, but once in a while I'll just plan something a little bit ahead to seed in later. And there's a whole lot of revision involved on the back end.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Um, what is next for Shad? This says book 1, so there has to be a book
Yes.
2, right?
There is indeed a book 2. Yeah, book 2 is coming October 17th. And that will see Shad going to Lebanon. So it's
Awesome.
kind of a humorous return to roots story,
Mhm.
but it takes some dark twists and turns, lots of action, lots of heart, lots of interesting and unique characters. It's just Shad book 1, but like adding a whole lot of depth to every element of it. And the cover release will be done this Saturday, actually, at
Yay.
1 p.m. Eastern. So if you're around any of our socials, be looking for that because it's going to be really cool. And the artist, as you know, Elizabeth, did Rick Riordan's last book, Daughters of the Deep. So Khadijah's just so talented and her art is amazing. So this book 2 cover is probably going to blow everyone's mind.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the cover of this one a little bit.
All right.
Everyone's always curious, like, do you get to have input into the cover? Did you know what it was going to look like, or was it kind of a surprise? Yeah.
So it was a little bit of both, right? So I told the instructions I gave Khadijah was I was like, I want this to be super chaotic, very different than mainstream middle grade, which like the mainstream middle grade kind of way of doing it, like most books. So I'm just going to use Babel here as an example. You'll have the artist's name on top and then or the artist's name on the bottom, and you'll have the main like imagery in the middle, and then you'll have like the title, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, no, let's just do something totally different, totally chaotic. And so Khadijah came up with this and was like, okay, why don't we just do the name and title in the middle? And we have this kind of swirly, cool scene around it. I'm like, yes, I love it.
Yeah.
And so I got 2 sketches, 2 totally different designs. And so that was the one we chose for book 1. And the second sketch actually influences a lot of book 2. And so here you just see kind of Shad doing his alchemy thing. And what you see, what is a necromancer, which is kind of, they practice a form of alchemy called shadow alchemy. This is not a spoiler. They just kind of can manipulate shadows and transform into shadows and whatnot. And it's just like very dynamic. I just love the energy that it gives off.
Yeah, I do too. And I also love that we get a glimpse of the academy on the back, which is so fun.
Yes, that's the main courtyard where a lot of the fun happens. You get to see the Aladdin statue that is discussed a little bit in the story, as well as, if you look close enough, a furry little friend who happens to be named after my mother.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's so cool. So if they're going to Lebanon in the second book, does that mean you're gonna go visit Lebanon to do some extra research?
That's the one thing about being an author that's pretty awesome, is that we get to like deduct our vacations on our taxes as long as we can justify it. So whenever I go to Lebanon, it's like, hey, this makes its way into my books. It like influences my books really heavily in terms of culture, language, food, everything. So I'm totally deducting everything that I do there, all the delicious desserts I eat. Now, with that said, Lebanon's a little tricky right now, both for many reasons, but my parents go there all the time, and
Yeah,
so I'm definitely due for a trip. We'll
yeah,
see. I think that it might be in the cards, um, and I would like to go.
yeah,
So if I can make it out, I will.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That gets me curious. So, Shad's story, he was born in Lebanon and moved to America in the early part of his life. Does that reflect your story, or were your parents um I won't ask follow up. Does that reflect your story?
That's a great question. So it's very similar. But so my parents had me here in America, and the plan was to, okay, get the citizenship and let's go back to Lebanon. And
Mhm.
so they had me, and then we went to Lebanon after. And so I spent a large chunk of my early, like maybe ages like 3 to 4, 2 to 4-ish in Lebanon. Like, okay, my parents were like, we're gonna settle down here, we're gonna build a life for ourselves here. That didn't work out because Lebanon's economy is like not the greatest. And so we ended up coming back here, and it felt like immigrating. It felt like brand new because I didn't have that kind of implant of like, or like the imprint rather, of like American culture as a
Mhm.
toddler. And so
Yeah.
coming back when I was 4, when I'd already started school in Lebanon, was a little bit of a culture shock. And so everything was kind of brand new. I was learning to navigate both my Arab culture as well as American culture.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're all benefiting from getting a window into that experience.
Yeah.
I think it's beneficial for all of us to have a window into an experience that is different than our own, or a mirror on an experience that maybe is similar than your own. We need both kinds of books in the world. Yeah.
I agree. I always love seeing folks who can draw from like very specific elements of their cultures. I feel like it always adds so much to the story. And beyond just food, like just the chaos of certain cultures or the calm of certain cultures, it just always intrigues me. I find that like I grew up reading just mainstream books, which were mostly like white American characters, and that's totally fine. Like those books are definitely necessary as well. However, whenever I read like a very diverse book that kind of takes me to somewhere that I've never been, or a culture allows me to explore a culture that I've never been able to explore before, I always find that I get kind of an added excitement,
Yeah.
diving into those books.
Yeah. Um, I am having the best time talking to you, George. If anyone that is watching right now would like to ask George a question, feel free to drop that in the chat or in the comments on Facebook. I am keeping an eye on those. So I just wanted to throw that out there again, that if anyone else has any questions, I'd love to feed them to George here while we have him as a captive audience.
And if not, I got so many like amazing questions from the kids today.
Yeah,
Like some of them were so random.
throw
Like,
us one.
yeah, I think that one I got asked the most is if I'm rich from being an author. I think that actually was the most commonly asked question. Are you rich? And like kids have short attention spans, so I'll just get that question like every few questions, they'll just re-ask it because they somehow think like authors are rich. And I can see how they can get that perception from media. Um, but that's always so fun because then I get to like say in a very safe space, no, we actually don't make that much money.
Yeah.
Um, And I've been very fortunate with the deals that I've gotten, like have been larger than most. But even then, it's just taxes and like the way that publishing deals are structured. I'm not gonna tell that all to a kid.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I love that. I love that they ask the questions we all want to know the answers to.
otherwise, it's why are you bald and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Very good questions.
Fair. I mean, do you want to talk about it? Why you're bald?
Yeah. So this is actually a big part of my presentation and it's actually a good writing question because my graphic novels, which obviously come out in 2025, center on this experience, this part of my experience, which was pretty foundational growing up. So I have alopecia, and that is a very rare condition where kind of your body says, hey, hair is a bad thing. Let's get rid of all of it. And so I had that happen to me. And so kind of growing up across high school, I was losing my hair a little slowly. However, it wasn't really noticeable. It wasn't really an issue. But then I got to college, and in the later college years, it started to like, I started to lose hair in my scalp, which is like, okay, male pattern baldness, but it was a little more elevated than that. And the hair went away almost immediately. And so there was this period of like, quickly I lost all my hair, and I was like, okay, this is a whole different like George now. And so there's an adjustment period. And I think that particular period of time is what I based the first graphic novel, which is called Tarek's Bizarre Adventure, off of. And so it's like about this 12-year-old kid who like loses his hair almost immediately in a short period of time, and kind of trying to handle the whiplash of it all, because it does kind of create a new identity, especially to Arabs who, for us, hair as Arab men is like part of our identity and part of who we are and a point of pride. So being able to adjust to that, yeah. And so I always love explaining that to kids because they're just so fascinated. They're like, how can this be? Like we all have bald people in our lives, and they're like, oh, you're 27.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I do have a question here. How many school visits have you made, and how many Zoom presentations have you made?
So I haven't made many presentations. I like to repurpose kind of similar ones. Actually, I'm going to amend that. I've made a lot of presentations, but mostly for conferences and not for school visits. For school visits, I kind of tend to stick with what is tried and true. And I have like one core presentation that I continually add on and take away from. So that one's a little easier because oftentimes kids will kind of guide the conversation in their own way as well. I've done quite a few school presentations, mostly virtual, because we're still kind of climbing out of the COVID era, and I feel like schools are still trying to adjust to that. But I have had a couple in-person visits, and those are extra special, especially when you kind of get swarmed by the kids and they're like asking for autographs and then asking super random questions and just being silly all around, and you kind of get to be silly together. It's fun. You lose that a little bit with virtual visits, but I mean, I've done, maybe a dozen of them, if not a little more, it gets better every time.
Yeah, for sure. What's the experience like going to conferences? So I met you for the first time at a booksellers conference, which was very fun. But I'm curious what it's like from an author perspective.
Yeah, so from an author's perspective, it's kind of, you get a little bit of the fan experience, but also you get a little bit of the pro experience. With the fan experience, I myself am a reader. I myself is a consumer. And so when I get to go to like Worldcon, which is like the world's biggest fantasy conference, I'm invited to lead workshops. I'm invited to be in panels with like large crowds of people. It's kind of cool because I get to geek out as a panelist, sitting next to like my idol at times. So for example, I'm going to go to Boston next week, and I have to be part of a panel with Twee Sutherland, who wrote this series Wings of Fire, which is absolutely massive. And I'm just like, oh my God, I have to be next to this like massive author who I've admired so much. So I get that like a little bit of giddiness as a fan. And then of course there's the little bit of fun that comes with being an author and having that kind of credibility. And so folks ask you questions. I've had folks ask for autographs for some reason. I don't think I really merit autographs, but I guess my Instagram and TikTok personality has merited a few folks who enjoy my content.
Yeah.
So that's been really fun as well, and kind of trippy to experience. And then it's all around good time because we're all kind of geeks. We're all
Yeah.
nerds. And so we all have to like geek out over things like sci-fi and fantasy and books and movies and all that stuff. So cons and conferences are like the best part of it. It's just an added benefit.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, in case anybody like kind of joined in the middle of our conversation, we like to play this game where we ask people to describe a book in 6 words or less. So George, can you describe Shad Hadid and the Alchemists of Alexandria in 6 words or 6 words or less?
And I know that we've played this game before, but I've totally forgotten my response. So I'm not even going to try and remember my response. I'm just going to try and come up with something brand new from scratch. I would say chaotic kids, tasty desserts, of course, and Arab culture.
Nice.
I think the combination of those will pretty much sum up Shad. There's a whole lot more, but in 6 words, that's what I would go.
Yeah, for sure. And if you are looking for a copy of your own, which I highly recommend, there's a link to our website in the chat features of both the webinar and the Facebook live stream. And we would love for you to order a copy of Shad Hadid. And we are an independent bookstore and we love to ship things. Anything else you want to tell us about tonight?
So I doubt anyone who is listening may be in the St. Louis area, but I was invited to do an event with James Ponti, who is a fantastic author who just released his new book in his best-selling City Spy series. So that's going to be exciting. Again, we'll be in Boston next week. So if anyone's around, I'm pretty accessible. Feel free to shout out and reach out in any way that you'd like. And Shad Book 2's cover reveal happens Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern. So you'll see a lot of bookstores and a lot of bookish people tweeting, TikToking, and whatever about that. That'll be fun. And just be on the lookout for a lot of really cool news coming your way.
Yeah, it's going to be incredible. Yes, and that event with James Ponti is with one of our bookstore friends, the Novel Neighbor, correct?
Yes.
So yes, if you are in the St. Louis area, we absolutely recommend you check that out. Talking about finding you online, are there specific places we should direct people if they're interested in following along with your work?
Yes, by @by George Jreije, my full name, on Twitter, where I mostly live, Instagram, and TikTok. And I'm also like trying to develop a little bit of a presence on LinkedIn randomly, just because I saw Jerry Craft do it. And I was like, this is still a ripe space. So I'm going to kind of do my thing here. So you can find me across social media. I'm everywhere. And don't be a stranger.
Awesome. I love it. And if you want to follow along with Schuler Books, we are also everywhere. And we're just Schuler Books on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok. And if you enjoy an event like this, we try to do them often. So thank you so much, George. I can't express enough how excited I am for you, how excited I am for Shad Hadid to be in the world, for us to hopefully make this a huge deal and have lots of kids read it, and adults and people of all ages. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thanks to Schuler Books for hosting me, and thanks to the small but mighty folks who showed up and who will be seeing this later on as it's posted.
Absolutely. All right, have a great night.
You too. Bye.